And now, the survival show that once survived dropping water balloons on German U-boats. In this episode, we sit down with Bobby Allison from Civil Air Patrol. We'll find out what the heck C.A.P is and how you may be able to get some really cool survival training. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 148. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Bobby, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, I'm really very excited to do this show with you today, and I have ulterior motives rather than just exposing people to C.A.P, because I had questions about exactly what Civil Air Patrol was and selfish reasons for someday getting a pilot's license in ours, but we'll come to that in a bit. But my first question for you is, how did you get involved in C.A.P, otherwise known as Civil Air Patrol?
I got involved when I was 13, actually. I was young and I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up at that age, and that was I was going to join the Air Force. I was going to be a fighter pilot, and a lot of that was based off of my family's history, my dad, grandfathers, and other relatives and such. And so I joined the cadet program of C.A.P when I was 13, and of course I also did JROTC in my high school too. So
okay.
I got to experience both, but that's what got me started, and I enjoyed it so much as a cadet that I stuck with it, and I'm still here almost 22 years later.
Wow, that's something for the program. I guess, what is Civil Air Patrol? Because what do they do as an organization for people who aren't familiar with it?
We are, as you'll commonly see stated, we're an official auxiliary of the United States Air Force. In fact, recently, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, General Welsh, just declared last week that they now consider Civil Air Patrol part of the total force.
Okay.
Within quotation marks there. And that basically means the active duty, the Air National Guard, the reserve, and then the auxiliary, which is Civil Air Patrol, and then as well families and civilians employees. So, and basically we've been performing in that manner for 70 years, but they decided to finally make it official in Air Force doctrine.
Okay.
So, but we perform a lot of the non-combat missions for the Air Force throughout the United States, and we're chartered with 3 primary missions, which are aerospace education, cadet programs, and emergency services. And of course, each one of those breaks down into more detail.
Okay. So you said non-combat missions. I guess, what all does that include?
Well, that's just sort of my way of making it clear that, we're an auxiliary, and we're actually made up of civilian volunteers.
So no guns or missiles or anything exciting is what you're saying. Oh, man,
that's right.
That's terrible.
There's exciting aspects to it, but but yeah, no bombs, no missiles, no defensive or offensive capabilities, except during World War II, which I could get into here a little bit. That was a little different scenario. Today, right, it's take care of the missions here stateside that the Air Force is charged with that we can handle. In a lot of those cases, it's kind of a bang for the buck sort of situation.
So no bombs, but they give you water balloons? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, not quite.
Okay.
But they do give us state-of-the-art, brand new Cessna aircraft, 172s, 182s. And
nice.
When I say state-of-the-art, I'm saying about half of our fleet, which is made up of 550 aircraft nationwide. Most of those are, well, I say most, about half of those are made up with your computer glass cockpits, Garmin G1000s, the newest navigation techniques or capabilities, I should say, and as well a radio suite. And it's the same for our vehicles on the ground. We've got some old vehicles in the fleet, but the newer ones, the older ones, are all decked out the same. We've got great communications equipment and other equipment for doing search and rescue and disaster relief and stuff. So the Air Force provides that for us so we can complete that mission for them as volunteers.
Cool. Now, before we go headfirst into this episode, there are a few things I want to mention to the audience. The first one is we're going to have 2 shows this week in honor of Veterans Day. There will be one on C.A.P, this one, obviously. Yes, it's civilian, but they are an auxiliary of the Air Force, as you just heard mentioned. And C.A.P does some things that are really neat that I wanted to share with y'all. So this seemed like the perfect time to do that. The second episode will air Wednesday. I'll be joined by a veteran podcast host, and that is veteran in the military sense, not just somebody who's been doing it for a long time. It's something y'all will want to hear whether you're a vet or not. So be sure to check out your feed again on Wednesday. The second announcement is for members of the ITRH Roving Horde, or for those thinking about becoming part of the Armada. There is now a private Facebook group for the Armada. We decided to go ahead and add that. So just to make conversations a little bit easier, because of course with a forum, you have to log into the super highly encrypted, super secret membership section to have those conversations. And while that's really cool for sharing pictures or asking questions about things that you don't necessarily want to be public, it's not always the most conducive to fast, generic conversations or quick questions about, hey, how do I do X, or how do I do Y, or I just passed my ham test, or look, Jason just hurt himself building a new rabbit cage, that kind of fun stuff. So we've added that Facebook group. It is a new part of the members' benefits that ITRH Roving Horde Armada members get. And of course, if you get at least $1.33 per episode worth of value out of this show for less than $2.50 a month, you can help keep us on the air by supporting and becoming a member at itrh.net. Go there, you'll get more information, you'll find out what we're doing with the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. It is a lot more than just, hey, give us some money so we can keep doing this show. We wanted to provide a lot more benefit and value to members than just the show itself and archives to the show. So there's all kinds of great stuff back there. The private Facebook group is just the newest addition. Now, the next thing I wanted to bring up is for everyone to keep their eyes open. I'll be making an announcement here, hopefully in the next few weeks. There's a really cool project I've been working on for 2 months now. It is essentially 10 videos that walk you through step by step all the things you should be doing in prep. And this is great for people who are new, and people who've even been in it for a while are really going to enjoy it too. It was born out of the summer shorts. Actually, it was the last summer short, where it was the 7 things I wish I had done differently in prep, or to put it in a different way, if I was going to start doing prep today, knowing what I know now, how would I do it differently? And so what I've done is I sat down and I expanded on that, because that ended up being a really popular episode and I didn't expect it. But I've sat down and turned it into a 10-part prepper series. Each video will be roughly about 5 minutes long. It's going to be some really cool stuff. And after it's released, it will be archived to the member section and won't be available again to everybody else. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And with that, let's get back into hearing about C.A.P. So do y'all, and this is totally off topic or sort of off topic, do y'all coordinate with Aries, the emergency hamsters?
We do. Mars, Aries, all those guys. Mm-hmm. We have an HF radio capability within Civil Air Patrol. In fact, we have the largest VHF radio system in the nation, but we also do HF as well for our long-range communications. And we've done plenty of exercises with Aries and Mars and some of those other organizations. And if I'm correct, I think Mars is actually going away or has gone away.
But, is it? Oh, okay.
But we've got a lot of ham radio guys in the organization as well, so they bring that expertise and they help us out there, because that's sort of their gig. So, mm-hmm. But yeah, we do a lot of that. Okay. Comm is a big thing for us.
Yeah, I would imagine. That's funny. The more I get into preparedness and things like that, the more I wish I had focused on comms in the very beginning.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a big. I'm a amateur radio myself. I've just got technician now, but I need to take my test, get my general. But yeah, that's a big part of any preparedness, in my opinion, or any organization. Mm-hmm. Comm is where it's at.
And definitely. Now, you mentioned World War II, and to come back to that for just a second, that was going to be one of the questions I had to share with listeners of where C.A.P came from. Like, when was it formed and why was it formed?
Basically, in the mid to late 1930s, the United States was starting to come out of its shell, and everyone was not so much in the isolationism anymore. And there were a lot of patriots that saw what was going on over in Germany and Japan in the late 30s there. And basically, it was civilians that wanted to be able to volunteer and help the United States by performing missions and such. And of course, we knew World War II was coming. So you had a lot of other people that were for it as well. Some Air Force, some civilian, including LaGuardia, who the airport's named after and was the former mayor of New York.
Uh,
He had a hand in it as well. But basically, what happened was Civil Air Patrol was formed, and it gave a lot of the aviation and aerospace minded civilians a way to volunteer their service to the United States. And on 1 December 1941, that was our official date of formation. 7 days before Pearl Harbor, and basically just in time, the Civil Air Patrol was created.
oh, very neat. Okay. So definitely a lot of history there.
Yes. And they spent World War II doing a number of missions, and a lot of them were pretty exciting and hazardous. They performed a lot of missions for civil defense and the Army Air Corps, Army Air Force during that time. The number one mission that we were most well known for back then was they were submarine hunters off the Atlantic coast mostly.
Oh, that
And
is exciting.
yeah, the Gulf Coast as well.
Mm.
And basically, they flew high wing aircraft like Stinsons and such back during that time, and observation aircraft that the Air Corps would give them. And they were painted up yellow and red, and they would patrol the coastlines, and they'd go out to sea and watch for submarines. And they'd have to be able to discern between a whale and a sub underneath the water. It was pretty interesting. And some of them carried small 250-pound bombs and depth charges.
Oh,
And
interesting.
and as a result, a number of submarines were chased away, a number were damaged, and we were credited with sinking 2 subs. So,
Neat.
in addition, we were also responsible for saving some victims of sub attacks and crash victims and ships that were sinking and such. So there's a number of things. That was one big part of it, and we had coastal patrol bases all up along the Atlantic and the Gulf Coast. Late in the war, Germany started backing off with their U-boats, and they weren't as prevalent there off our coast. And they asked a captured U-boat captain why the Germans had decided to back off, and not because they were doing a pretty good job with some of our shipping in the ocean at that time. And his reply was it was because of those damned red and yellow little airplanes. So, and that's not exactly verbatim, but that's pretty close. I think
Yeah.
I switched a couple words up, but so we actually had an effect, a positive one at that.
Mm.
And besides those duties, we performed a number of other wartime duties, a lot of civil defense stuff, but they also towed aerial targets for anti-aircraft gunners, which was pretty dangerous. And there were some accidents and some lives lost. It was the same on the coastal patrol too. There were some lives lost there, but that's what you get when put yourself in harm's way for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, World War II, and in fact, we just basically the World War II Civil Air Patrol veterans, if you want to call them that, were recognized by Congress and were just awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for their actions and service during World War II. So that's something we're pretty proud of right now as well. We're pretty proud of that, and there's not a whole lot of them left. Like World War II veterans, we're losing them as the years go on. So.
Mm-hmm. So that's pretty interesting, and that's a fascinating history of it. And it's definitely, I think a lot of people don't even know C.A.P exists. And people that were perhaps aware of it maybe didn't necessarily realize the history and the extent of the history and just how pivotal. Like I didn't even know the thing about the the yellow and red airplane. So that's really quite fascinating. Y'all really actually do quite a bit, it sounds like.
Yeah, in fact, and we can get into it more as we go along, but we probably do a whole lot more than we did back then just because there's a need for it. And everyone calls it this period, post 9/11, but Homeland Security is a big deal. And that tacked on a lot of new missions for us today.
Hmm.
There were such great contributions during the war that Civil Air Patrol remained as an organization, and we were assigned to the War Department under the jurisdiction of the Army Air Corps, Army Air Force. It was in July 1946, and President Truman signed a public law into being that incorporated Civil Air Patrol as a nonprofit benevolent organization. And then later, when the Air Force actually became the United States Air Force, which I believe was 1947 or 48, Congress passed a public law that permanently established Civil Air Patrol as the official auxiliary of the brand new United States Air Force. And that's when they actually set forth our three primary missions, which are the same today. Like I said earlier, aerospace education, cadet programs, and emergency services. And since then, it's the missions and the details have only grown. So
Interesting. Okay. That's really cool. And I guess that really lends itself to a question of how does C.A.P supplement or augment what the U.S. Air Force is already doing today?
we actually tackle a lot of missions that they do and don't do themselves. And some of it's just a matter of being our sole mission. In the area of emergency services, the Air Force is charged with search and rescue in the United States. They have the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, which actually came about, I believe, in the 60s or 70s. And it was basically created to coordinate all search and rescue activities within the United States. And it had some growing pains and there were a lot of lessons learned. But Civil Air Patrol has been charged with a large part of that search and rescue. And we actually take care of the numbers kind of differ, but 85% to 90% of all inland search and rescue in the United States is accomplished by C.A.P.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know that.
And the number may not be as large as that. The percentage probably has shrunken just a little bit because today there are a lot of counties and parishes in different states that have formed a lot of their own resources for search and rescue. And as a result, when those organizations get engaged, say for a missing person, they're actually better suited and, they know the lay of the land. It's their backyard. But if they need the assistance, they can put in their request and then we come in and help as well. So it's still a pretty high number. And most of our search and rescue activities are actually for downed or missing aircraft. And as an organization with a huge aviation focus, that kind of fits us. So
interesting. When y'all are doing this, does that, y'all are Civil Air Patrols. Do y'all actually do ground operations as well for search and rescue, or do y'all just take care of the...
We do both. We're well known as an aviation entity, so we do have a large air presence, and the majority of it is accomplished from the air, but we do have ground teams for search and rescue. They go through a lot of intense training, including a little bit of survival and then search skills, how to become a leader of one of those teams, how to work with the air crews up above, air to ground coordination. It gets pretty in depth, but we've got 3 levels of qualifications for those ground team members, and they go through quite a bit of training just to get that certification so they can work with the air crews and they can work by themselves as well. It's not uncommon for us to send a ground team out on a search mission when the weather's not good for our aircraft to launch.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big role. I had no idea that y'all's role in search and rescue was that large.
It is, and it can be. And in some locations, it varies. The capability of Civil Air Patrol to accomplish a lot of its missions depends on its membership. And that is, how many volunteers we actually have that are active and able to accomplish that duty. Now, I'm a member of the Arkansas wing, and we're a smaller state than like Texas or California, where they have larger population and more volunteers. In some parts we have some areas of the state we have squadrons that don't quite have the strength to support a ground team, but they might have enough people to put an air crew or 2 up. So it varies from squadron to squadron and geographical area as well. Mm-hmm. Whereas where you're at in Texas, Texas is pretty large.
Yeah,
and mainly because they've got that large population, so they have a better volunteer base. And they have a lot more squadrons, a lot more aircraft, and a lot more resources than we do here in Arkansas, just for an example.
Okay. And the training part of that sounds pretty extensive too for search and rescue.
It is. It's something that's evolved over time, and it's a lessons learned thing. But when there became a presidential mandate for, I don't know how familiar you are with the incident command system.
A little bit.
Okay. Basically, the presidential mandate was everyone must conform to the Incident Command System, or NIMS, which is the National Incident Management System. And it's actually something that California came up with a long time ago and started, but it really helps interoperability between a lot of agencies that don't normally work with each other. It took a while for the military, including Civil Air Patrol, to catch on to ICS. But as we've morphed into that new system, and ICS is just a structure for command and leadership, and then dividing your resources and units up in an appropriate way to handle a mission, it gets a little more mundane from there. But as we've integrated ICS into our system, we've made a lot of improvements in how we train and how we interact just amongst ourselves within C.A.P. as well as with other agencies. In today's world, it's much more common than it used to be for us to work with other agencies, whether they're local, county, state, or even national. So as a result, we've got a pretty robust training program for ground crews, air crews, and then our mission-based staff, which is our members that sit there behind the scenes and control the ground teams, control the air crews, and make the plans and execute the operations and send them into the areas they need to go to complete the mission.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a big operation.
Yeah. I hope I'm not throwing too much at you at once.
No, it's great. It's great
okay.
stuff. I mean, it's fantastic. And I guess that also lends itself to the question about disaster relief, because I know y'all play a role in that as well.
We do.
Tell me about that. Is it as extensive as the search and rescue or more, or how does that work?
It can be. And in fact, it can result in more man hours sometimes depending on the disaster. I think because of the way the news is today, global news and news just within the United States, a lot of disasters are more prominent than they used to be. So it seems like we've got a lot more, but we're just as busy now as we used to be in the past with disaster relief. And that includes from the air, we do a lot of post damage assessment for the local entities, the state and counties and such. So say a tornado has wiped a swath across, a portion of your county or your state, and the local or the state Department of Emergency Management wants to see exactly how extensive that damage is. Well, we can put an aircraft up in the air and we can give them still photography or video imagery of that destruction. That's the same thing for hurricanes or other, natural disasters. Hurricane Katrina was a very big operation for us. I actually deployed myself twice for that.
Oh, wow.
And once part of a ground team and another time as part of the air crew. I can just give you some examples from that, but we're actually stationed in Baton Rouge for disaster relief for Hurricane Katrina. And a lot of the operations included, like I said, damage assessment. FEMA or some other organizations would send us to a certain spot there in New Orleans, and they want to know exactly what it looks like from the air. Is it underwater or is it salvageable, so on and so forth. And also while we were in the air, we were also spotting for people on rooftops.
Mm-hmm.
Those helicopters could go in and pull them off. Man, that was another impressive thing to see was all the aircraft above and below over New Orleans at that time was just amazing. And it's pretty amazing there weren't more accidents because of that. But they set an altitude for each type of aircraft, and below 500 feet, helicopters were operating, and above 1,000 feet, fixed wing aircraft were operating, and that included us. So there were helicopters zooming back and forth, and we'd spot a survivor, and they'd send a Coast Guard or a Marine or an Air Force and Army helicopter in there. There was a lot of forces there trying to do that. We also did photography of certain areas as well, not just damage assessment, but sometimes they want us to bring back physical pictures. And that's one of the things we do really well. We use Cessna 172 and 182 aircraft for most of our operations. Alaska's a little different. I can get into that later. They've got a variety of aircraft just because that's Alaska.
Yeah.
But you can slow them down pretty well, and they work well with a DSLR camera. And you can get the photos you need. We even have a specialty qualification called aerial photography just for that kind of work. But that's mostly what we do for disaster relief is a damage assessment. And then other duties as assigned. So, and then on the ground, I was actually sent to Pascagoula, Mississippi for that. But we had a large ground operation there on the Mississippi coast and stretching towards Alabama. And we had a number of duties, and that was checking on certain households, or the military also had us tasked to find active duty guard and reserve service members that their units hadn't heard from them, and they wanted us to check and make sure that they were okay. And we did a lot of that, and we also helped the Red Cross pass out supplies, food, water, MREs and stuff like that. So, and a lot of our ground teams can be CERT qualified. Off the top of my head, I can't exactly remember what CERT stands for. I don't know. Are you familiar with CERT?
Yeah. I actually went through it a number of years ago. So Community
I think
Emergency Response Team.
that's exactly right. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
But a lot of our ground teams are CERT qualified. So when they drive up on a disaster relief situation, the organizations there know exactly what to do with us. It's another common term everyone's familiar with when it comes to that sort of thing. That's disaster relief in a nutshell, I suppose.
Man, y'all are an action-packed organization. And I know y'all also have, or at least I've heard, I shouldn't say I know because I don't know firsthand, but I've heard y'all have a lot to do with border security and just seeing, I guess, putting eyes on the ground, or how does that work?
Yes, I don't know a lot of detail about that. I just know it broadly because mostly you're talking about the Texas, Arizona, New Mexico wings, maybe California, but they do provide aerial overwatch, I suppose, for border security. And I don't think that that's a mission we are as involved with as we used to be. Mainly because there's some concerns there with posse comitatus, which actually applies to us as well as the military.
Oh, does it really?
Yeah, we actually can't be involved in any law enforcement duties, and it's a whole lot of legalese. You know?
It always is.
Yeah.
So to switch off to the kids, doing it for the kids.
Right.
I know y'all have a lot to do with outreach and youth programs. What's all involved with those?
One of our primary missions is cadet programs. We have a program where kids aged 12 to 18 can join the Civil Air Patrol cadet program, basically. It's a program that's similar to junior ROTC, but I would say it's more like JROTC on crack. It's a lot more involved. There's a lot more for them to do. It's a lot more challenging. And it's basically a program where cadets join up and they take part in all of the primary missions that everyone else does within Civil Air Patrol, including, emergency services, search and rescue, disaster relief. They get to participate in all that. And there's a lot of other programs that go with it too. Like I said, I was a former cadet too, and I joined up because I was interested in the military, but a lot of youth join for other reasons. Just they're interested in flying or aerospace, and there's a little bit of that for all of them. They join up and they progress through a program that has grade and rank, and they start out as a basic cadet or a cadet basic, and they move up through the cadet enlisted ranks, which model the Air Force rank and grade structure. As they move through the enlisted ranks, they have to test, and that includes knowledge-based stuff for aerospace and leadership. And then there's also physical fitness testing as well. Physical fitness is a big part of the program and something we strongly encourage. And then they eventually can become a cadet officer, and there's awards and achievements as they go along. And if a cadet stays with the program long enough and becomes a cadet officer, we have an achievement called the Mitchell Award, which is named for Billy Mitchell, a famous Army Air Corps and Air Force officer. But anyway, if they achieve their Mitchell Award, that's a big step in the program, and it can have benefits for them later on, especially if they decide to join the Air Force or the Army. There's benefits there. If they enlist and they have the Mitchell Award, once they graduate Air Force basic training, they're ahead of everyone else because they automatically slap on 2 stripes. And instead of coming out of basic training as an E1, they come out as an E3.
Oh,
so
cool.
They've already got 2 more stripes and more pay than anyone else.
That's always nice.
So that's just one small benefit, but they can progress through the program and top out at Cadet Colonel. There's several other achievements between then and from the Mitchell to the Cadet Colonel Award, which is called the Spots. And that's just the progression part of the program. On top of that, there's a lot of activities they get to participate in as a cadet. They attend their local squadron meetings once a week is typically how the schedule works out. And it varies from unit to unit, but they may meet on a Monday or a Tuesday night every week. And then they'll have weekend activities, and those activities include aerospace education, leadership training, and they can get involved with emergency services, and they can train to become a ground team member, and they can get CERT trained and participate in disaster relief as well, and they can help out during missions. We're a little guarded when it comes to search and rescue. Only the more mature cadets actually get to go out on an actual SAR for a missing person or a downed aircraft. We're very careful how we handle that.
That makes sense.
And it's the same with disaster relief, too. They're not going to go out there and start doing urban search and rescue in a disaster-stricken area with fallen buildings and such. But they are, they do have that ability to help. And in addition, we have 4 cadets. There's also, we have a lot of summer programs. We call them National Cadet Special Activities. But basically, and there's a lot more than when I was a cadet, but we have a lot of academies out there that last a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. One of the first things they have to do is they have to do an encampment, which is kind of like a cadet basic training. Depending on the wing, it lasts anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, and it teaches them all the basics about the Air Force and C.A.P. and drill and ceremonies, how to march, and how to be part of an honor guard. There's also an exposure to the U.S. Air Force and that way of life and the different jobs that Air Force personnel do. And in some instances, an encampment might be held on an Army post, but typically they're held on an Air Force base, so they get that exposure since we are the auxiliary of the U.S. Air Force. So it also turns out to be a great recruiting tool for the Air Force as well.
Imagine that.
Yeah, sure. But after they complete that encampment, which is part of their progression program so that they can gain rank, a lot of other opportunities open up for them for those summer activities. And we have programs like, say, a cadet's interested in he wants to become an Air Force fighter pilot, and he wants to know what that's all about. Well, we have a special activity called Undergraduate Pilot Training Familiarization Course. What that is that's a week or a week and a half long course that's held at a couple of different locations. One of them is Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas. The other one's Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi. Basically, they find out what it's like to be a student pilot in the Air Force. They find out what's involved with that, from waking up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and eating a fighter pilot's breakfast, which is a Pop-Tart and a Coke, to going through all the academia involved, including, memorizing boldface, which is, emergency procedures. And I know a little bit about that because I went through the course as a cadet. And if they're interested in space, the Air Force is really big in space, and that's where the future is right now. We have an Air Force Space Command familiarization course, and it's held in, I believe it used to be in Colorado, but it might be in Florida now. I think it's at Patrick Air Force Base. Without naming all 30 or 40 of them, there's a lot of them. There's other stuff too. We have an engineering academy. If they, that know they want to be an engineer one day, that's held at Auburn University. We also have what's called the pararescue orientation course for those cadets that are a little more gung-ho and they want to know what it's like to be a special ops guy in the Air Force, namely a pararescue jumper. Those guys that go in and save the downed pilots. They can go through a pararescue orientation course, but it's not easy. And there's a little additional paperwork there with that because it's pretty tough. They have pararescue and Army instructors, and they put them through some pretty rigorous training and experience, but a lot of them come out of it even more gung-ho than they were before. It's pretty impressive. And then we also have flight academies as well. So those cadets that aspire to become a pilot, they can have that chance. We have these powered flight academies and glider flight academies that are held in several different locations around the U.S. Most of these programs cost money, and as some things do in C.A.P. being a volunteer, but there's also scholarships available for them for Flight Academy and some of these other courses, especially depending on from wing to wing. So, but anyway, there's a lot out there for them to experience and try out. And like I said, I only listed a handful of what I think there's like 30 or 40 different activities and special academies, national special activities out there for them to participate in. As well, it program develops outstanding civilian leaders in the future too. They don't necessarily have to go to the military. That's not something we hammer into them. That's not what we're about. But if they want that exposure and they want to know what it's about, that opportunity's there for them. So,
wow, man, that's a lot of really cool activities for a kid.
It is, and it can get pretty involved and can get pretty busy. I've had some cadets that actually lined up 2 or 3 different activities in a summer, and their parents' complaint, or they were overjoyed, was that they didn't see their kid much during the summer. So, but this day and age, there's a lot for kids to do with our technology the way it is today with, video games and tablets and all that Snapchat and blah, blah, blah. So kids and youth are a little more distracted today than they used to be. And our cadet numbers kind of show that, I think. So we've got to find a way. We actually need to improve our recruiting for the cadet program and find a new way to get to those cadets. And I think we're starting to get that way. CAP is starting to become more involved with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and stuff. So maybe we'll get our numbers where we'd like to have them. But there's a lot of opportunity there for the youth if they're interested.
Very cool. I'm happy to hear that y'all are working towards trying to catch the attention of this generation that seems to have a very limited attention span. But,
That's right.
It's funny. I'm sitting here listening to it. And how are these kids not signing up? And if I was still a kid, I would be all over this. I mean, I actually really wish I'd known about this when I was a kid.
Yeah, I feel pretty fortunate that I got involved. In fact, I guess I was just about 13, or I just turned 13, and my neighbor had actually gotten involved. She was telling me about it, and I told my dad about it. I was like, Dad, I want to go. And he's like, Nah, I don't know. That doesn't sound right. I think CAP is just for adults, and luckily I pressed the issue enough to where I got to go to a meeting, and he was pretty impressed himself. So then, I was hooked.
Circling back to adults, is C.A.P open to people that aren't active or retired Air Force?
It is. Like I said, we're mostly civilian volunteers. That means non-paid. So sometimes that kind of turns people away. But yeah, we're a volunteer organization, and we're open to anyone that's interested in becoming a part of it and helping out. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what your education level is, although you do have to be able to read. So we have had some people ask that question, so I have to throw that out there.
Gotcha.
But it's open to everyone, and you can join the Civil Air Patrol and become a senior member at as young as 18. Some cadets, they just stay in the program long enough that they actually become a senior member too. They can stay until they're 21, and then they have to become a senior member of the organization.
Oh, okay.
But you can join as young as 18, and you can join as old as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. As long as we're on the age, to backtrack for a second, how old does a kid have to be to get involved with C.A.P?
In order to join, you can't be any older than 18 to join as a cadet, but you can be as young as 12.
Okay.
And it used to be, I think they've changed it a little bit because homeschool sort of got the better of us, but it used to be if you'd graduated the 6th grade,
okay,
you could join CAP. But we had a lot of 10-year-old 6th graders coming at us from homeschool because some of those kids are a little ahead in their program. But I believe it's back to 12 to 18.
Okay.
So, but you can stay a cadet until you're 21 if you join in those, between that age range.
And then after that, you become a senior, and you can get, sounds like, involved in all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, if you stick with it. We lose more cadets than we hold, and mostly that's because they go off to college or they go off on their own path in life. A lot of them actually come back later. We find them returning later on. Hey, I was a former cadet. I'm ready to get back in. 10 or 20 years later
after they're done discovering college girls and drinking.
Sure, or have a wife and kids.
Yeah,
later on. So, but yeah, so. We have an open volunteer membership, and anyone that wants to contribute, we'd love to have them. Because we're the auxiliary of the United States Air Force, we follow a military structure. We have military rank and grade, and we wear the military uniform. In order to do that, you have to maintain weight standards that are required in order to, wear that uniform. And for those members that don't meet the weight standard, that shouldn't scare them away, because we have what's called corporate uniforms, which are basically a uniform that CAP has that anyone can wear, so that you're not stuck in a corner because you don't meet those weight standards and can't wear the military uniform.
Gotcha.
So, but we accept all kinds. And of course, it is a volunteer organization, and with a volunteer organization, you get all kinds. So it can be very interesting at times. So we're big on membership and recruiting. So anyone that's interested, we'll typically take them.
Well, very cool. So now for my rather selfish question, because I've keep putting this off, but I'm hoping within the next year or two, I have the time to actually dedicate to doing it, as far as getting my pilot's license. And is that something that, as somebody's going through and helping out and volunteering, that they can also get hours in a plane that go towards that pilot's license while they're doing this stuff?
Yes, it's not exactly typically. A lot of members join CAP already have their pilot's license, and that shouldn't scare you away. But there's those opportunities for cadets to start on their pilot's license, and it's the same for senior members too. And typically that's because you come in and you join a squadron, and that squadron, if it's a flying squadron and has an aircraft assigned to it and has pilots, those pilots are more than willing to help get you started. They'll point you in the right direction. They'll make sure that if you have any questions they can't answer, they point you to the AOPA, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, to make sure you get on that right track.
Mm-hmm.
Get your medical and you go through instructor training. And a lot of times you're going to find a lot of these units have instructor pilots. Sometimes if you're nice enough and you treat them well, they're willing to take you through student training as an instructor.
Oh, very cool.
In some cases, and it's going to vary. I don't want to say this is how it is for
right,
every
of
C.A.P.
course,
unit.
yeah.
But sometimes, that means a discounted rate.
Mm-hmm.
It means you're not going to be paying like you would to go to a flight school, down the road at an FBO at some airport, where they're charging you for the fuel, the oil, and the maintenance for the aircraft,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, an hourly rate for being an instructor. So you could be paying $200 or $250 an hour just for instructor time or for student time with those. But there is the possibility you could get an instructor pilot to help you out. You might not have to pay as much. You might be out fuel, for the aircraft.
Mm.
There is that ability to use our aircraft as well for training.
Mm.
After you get your pilot's license, there's even more benefits to being a pilot in C.A.P. And we have, like I said, we're mostly Cessna 172, 182 aircraft, so it's not too complex, pretty good for most beginning pilots. And you have that ability to use our aircraft for your own personal flying and logbook for what we call proficiency flying, and we call it member flying.
Mm.
And you pay for it. You pay for the fuel, and you use our aircraft, and then you pay a small maintenance fee just to account for like oil and, typical maintenance that goes for a Cessna. It's typically like $50 to $100 an hour cheaper than renting a plane. So as a member, you can use our aircraft and save money. And in some cases, it's better than just belonging to a flying club.
Yeah.
And as you become a proficient pilot in C.A.P., you can start doing missions with us as well, including search and rescue, disaster relief, or even just transport missions, which is another thing we do. A lot of times we help the Red Cross and other agencies like departments of health in different states. And we transport medicine or in some cases body parts,
Wow.
for the Red Cross, like I said, the Department of Health.
Mm.
Anyway, you accrue hours that way. And a lot of those missions, it's paid for. So it's not out of your pocket. That's the big deal with C.A.P. When we perform a lot of those missions, those things are covered by the Air Force or that agency that's requesting us.
Mm-hmm.
So when you fly as a pilot, obviously that's not out of your pocket. It's just your time.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool. I mean, God, everything you've talked about today has been so cool. I feel like a little kid. Going back to what I was talking about, I wish I knew about it as a kid. Now, as an adult, I'm like, oh crap, what can I cut out of my time and go? This is like all kinds of fun stuff.
Right. It's pretty cool. And like I say, I'm not a pilot, but I do fly, and we have specialty qualifications for flight crews, and we have mission pilot, and then we have observers, and then we have scanners, and I'm a qualified scanner and observer, and I've got a couple hundred hours in that alone, not counting just flying on the fly with some of my friends and other pilots that go up just for fun.
Mm.
And like I said, I do both. So I also do the ground stuff too, and that's pretty engaging for me because I'm a pretty outdoorsy type, and I enjoy fishing and hunting and camping, and then I like the survival part of it too. And so when you train for ground team, you go out on field training exercises, and that's part of one of those things you have to demonstrate you can do is you have to be able to survive in the woods on your own with your basic gear, and in some cases, it's a little tougher, some cases a little bit easier.
Mm.
There's a little bit of everything for everyone, depending on how you want to contribute.
Very cool. Well, Bobby, if somebody was interested in this, how would they get hooked up with C.A.P. and find out if it's right for them and do some really cool volunteering and get some really cool new skills?
The first way would be to go to gocivilairpatrol.com. You can go to that site, and there's a lot of information or basic information about Civil Air Patrol. And there's also a contact page. And if you were to click on that, you can click on another button that says find a unit near me. And if you were to do that, it would show you the squadron closest to your location. And I'd recommend visiting that unit. Check it out for yourself. And every unit's a little bit different. So if you have several units in your area that are close to you, say like Houston, which I think has like 7 or 8 units. I can't remember for sure, but there's a lot of them down there. check out different units, and because some are a little different. Some focus more on flying and some focus more on cadet programs. So it varies from unit to unit, but that's the first thing I would suggest. Sit down and visit with their recruiting officer or their squadron commander. They're more than happy to give you the tour and tell you what it's all about. We hold a military structure, so we're divided up geographically, and every state is a wing. For example, there's Arkansas wing and there's Texas wing. And then those wings are grouped into regions, and then we have a national headquarters, which is based at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. But each wing's divided into groups or squadrons. When a member comes in to join up, they may not be interested in flying, or they may not be interested in ground team and search and rescue or disaster relief. And so we have a structure and a setup so that there's job duties, because in order for a squadron to operate, everybody's got to have a job. And it could be as simple as, I say simple, it's not really that simple, but it could be stuff like administration, personnel, public affairs, recruiting. There's leadership officers and aerospace officers for instruction in those areas, with cadets and senior members as well. And then, of course, as they gain experience and time, and we also have leadership schools for those senior members as they progress through their own program, professional development program, and progress through the ranks. And as they become experienced and they improve their leadership skills, there's chances for command, and they can work their way up the ranks and become squadron commanders or group commanders and such too. So just to give it a little bit more, because a lot of people come in and they don't really realize how much work is involved to run a squadron, and that, well, basically there's a need for everyone to contribute so that things run smoothly. The way I compare that is a lot of people think about being a pilot in the military or the Air Force, and they think, well, that's their job. They're a pilot, but that's not how it works at all. When you're a pilot in the Air Force, you also have an additional job duty, whether that's an operations officer or a duty officer, or they've got a bunch of different positions. So besides being a pilot, they also have to do a job, and that could be helping out in personnel or admin as well. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there to give everyone a better idea how a squadron works and job duties go. So, because there is that. And like I said, you get out of it what you put into it. And in order for things to run well, you have to put a lot into it. It takes some time.
Well, cool. Dude, that is awesome. I sure appreciate you coming on and sharing all this information with us today. And I mean, I really appreciate the volunteering work that you're doing as part of C.A.P.
Oh, thank you. No problem. I enjoy it. It's a dedication thing. So, if you're interested, you got to be prepared to put forth some time. If you put your heart and soul into it, you're going to really get a lot out of the program. And I think that goes with a lot of volunteer organizations today. But a lot of people, take that for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, dude, thanks again. I sure appreciate it.
Sure. No problem.
Again, be sure to check out your feed again on Wednesday, as the second episode this week in honor of Veterans Day will be out. And of course, help us keep the lights on by becoming part of the Roving Horde Armada. You can check that out by visiting itrh.net. Members get a whole lot more than just the show, and it is how we pay the bills around here and keep the show going. Again, visit itrh.net today and become part of the Roving Horde Armada. With that, we wrap up episode 148 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.
West.